Hello, welcome to my four-part lecture series. It's about the four happy hormones. That's your dopamine, your oxytocin, your serotonin, and your endorphins or your endorphins. So I'm going to talk about these four happy hormones, starting with the big one, the dopamine, and that's the largest one. So let's do this. Hello, welcome to my presentation on dopamine, the happy hormone. My name is Alfred, and let's get right into it. What it is, uh, dopamine basically is a chemical messenger in our brains that is known as a neurotransmitter. It's one of those chemical neurotransmitters that are produced in our brains. And what does it do? It activates certain areas in our brains responsible for feeling pleasure and reward. So basically, um, dopamine triggers our pleasure senses and reward. And why is it it's called the happy hormone or the feel good hormone? That's because it activates sensations in our body like eating, exercising, or achieving a goal, which makes us feel good. So, in other words, basically, most things that makes us feel good are triggered or heightened by uh, this hormone, the dopamine hormone. Feel it when you feel bliss, happy, that is, or you feel motivated, or you feel like you're highly concentrating on something. uh, Dopamine has a large play a large effect on whatever feeling uh, you feel at that moment. And other activities activated by dopamine, which are basically associated with our body systems and functions, are movement, sleep, learning, mood, our moods, obviously, memory, eating, and exercising. As you can see, what I've written here. These are just seven examples of uh, things that dopamine can activate, but there are more. There are many more. Excuse me. The dopamine can also activate things like listening to music, dancing, all those activities that make us kind of uh, feel good. So if you feel mostly like moving and you um, aren't rather, if you're not feeling well and you're not moving, right, it's best to um, move about so that dopamine can so that your brain can trigger dopamine in your system, and then you can move around easily. This means that um, a lot of the movements that we make basically is triggers dopamine. So even if you find it hard to do certain exercises, right, or certain things, that is, if you are consistent with that thing, then dopamine can then be released while you're doing that, because it tells your brain that this is something pleasurable, right? So those are the example of seven things that can be activated, um, that can activate rather the dopamine in your brain. And then some dopamine drawbacks, the negatives and of dopamine. And for all it's good, like anything else, too much or too little of it in our brains can lead to problems. The number one problem is addiction, of course. Dopamine addiction is very prominent, and it's something that really affects a large population, right? So, too much of something good will lead to addiction. So, we become addicted to the pleasure that's the stimuli, be it drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, etc. All these are associated with high level of dopamine. So, addiction is just it's triggered mostly by a very high level of dopamine in your blood, in your system, basically in your brain or in your blood system or whatever. So once you have too much of that, you're highly likely to be addicted to that, because your brain will always want pleasure, right? We always seeking for pleasure. So obviously, uh, seeking out pleasure is an addiction, right? So yeah, and then psychosis, but rather, having psychotic periods, right? Where we kind of lose our mind. This high level of dopamine leads to psychosis, which is basically a mental disorder, right? And symptoms can be hallucinating, delusions, and disordered thinking, and schizophrenia. So, if you want to avoid psychotic periods and psychotic uh, 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 mental effects of your psyche, right? It's best to have a very healthy level of dopamine. Yeah. Then number three, we have our Parkinson disease. Actually, I have a close family member who was my maternal grandma who died of Parkinson disease. It's a neurological disorder. Yeah, this one is actually caused by a low level of dopamine, right? So basically, your dopamine, um, uh, your dopamine level is low, and so your cells are producing a low level of dopamine. Um, this is almost like the opposite of addiction, right? Where you got so much high level of dopamine that you seek out more. But with the Parkinson disease, um, you have very low level of dopamine, and some of the symptoms will be tremors, stiffness, and difficulty with movement. By the way, I must say that Parkinson disease it's just this low level of dopamine is obviously just one part. There's more complication to this and of this disease here. So it's just one part or a fraction of what the disease is all about. But low dopamine has been linked to Parkinson diseases and stuff like that. Impulsiveness. Well, basically, impulsiveness is the anxiety that we usually get, right? Making us distressed and anxious and all that. And being impulsive, you tend to make very poor decisions, right? Because you are not thinking clearly most of the time. For example, when you see something that will trigger uh, you your dopamine, right, and you like the thing. For example, maybe for example love shoes or maybe sneakers. When I see sneakers, then I become impulsive and would probably buy one just because, not even because I need it or anything, because I've just seen it and I want it at that moment. So that's an impulsive behavior, buying or wanting things without really thinking them through. So if you really need that thing, so we usually see compulsive shoppers, people who just buy things in an impulse. If I saw it's impulsive shoppers who buy things in impulse, you actually um, uh, being impulsive when you're buying things without really thinking them out. So this whole thing leads to, it's because most of the time it's because of anxiety, and you become very hyper and impulsive. And your mood disorder imbalances have been linked to mood disorders. So dopamine imbalances have been linked to mood disorders such as depression and bipolar. So your mood does change with the imbalances of dopamine. So it's very important to check your dopamine levels or know your dopamine level, but mostly to know your dopamine intake, those things that trigger your dopamine basically. And to summarize it all, right, you want to check your habits. First of all, it's your habits. Obviously, I'm talking here if you find yourself being impulsive, just like what we talked about before, having addiction, psychosis, and all these mood swings and stuff, right? Then you'd want to check your habits and your life style, right? The things you eat, the things you do in a daily basis, right? So you can better dictate your behavior and your lifestyle. So balancing things that may lead to too much dopamine or too little should be checked, because, like I said, too much dopamine is it's not good, just as much as too little will not be good. So because we live in an era where we can get our fixes or whatever we want at will, and basically at the modern times that we live, drugs are not the only culprit for dopamine, right? In the past, hard drugs such as heroin, crack, whatever, and even weed and stuff like that used to be the culprits and the main source of dopamine. But now there are just too much stimuli around us, right? Everything's almost a stimulation. So with our dopamine levels, you have to recognize your dopamine triggers, right? Usual things you love doing or consuming. So anything that you love doing and then it hypens your dopamine, then you have to check it out. Or things you like consuming, so you can figure out how to balance these chemicals in your brains, so you won't have so it won't mess up your brain functions, right? So make sure you know your triggers, right? For some it might be comfort food, for some it might be watching too much movies, the series, for some it might be just listening to music. At times the dopamine goes high, too high. So two good example would be porn for men, right, and social media for women. So I've chosen this because these affect mostly, like porn mostly affect men, and social media mostly affect women negatively, right? And obviously there are in betweens. It's not that there's exclusive to men, or the porn thing is exclusive to men, or social media is exclusive to women, but these are the most famous for both, for both sexes, right? So and they are highly addictive. uh, Porn for men is highly addictive, because it's obviously is connected to sex, and social media is highly addictive to women, maybe because it's connected to the social proof and social value. We know that women love social proof, as in validation, and so once you get those likes, dopamine goes up. um, this is exactly why YouTube stopped putting thumbs down, the thumbs down function where if you don't like a video, you put the thumbs down, because they know it will affect women. Ironically, it will affect women in a negative way, but even if you put a thumbs up, it still will affect women in a negative way. So they're trying to protect a lot of people, but at the same time they're harming people, because it becomes addictive. Those thumbs up, like likes and all that, those are addictive. So you find yourself, your dopamine going and seeking out validation because of that. So yeah, those two should be really you should really watch out for them. For men, the porn. As myself, a former porn addict, yeah, I did find myself constantly watching porn and seeking out pleasure because of it, right? So you find, excuse me, you find that once this becomes a part of you, then it becomes hard to get rid of it, because it overrides your pleasure, your pleasure sensories, and you want more of it, right? And everything becomes about pleasure. So this obviously will affect this. The same way will go for social media, right? You constantly, for you women, for most women at least, they're constantly chasing the validation, um, likes. You can see this in Facebook, whatever, Twitter, whatever, Instagram, and all that. All these social media will have all these um, validation buttons, like the likes, love, and all that, and these will tend to make people seek out more of it. So, and unfortunately, this rewires our brain to always be thinking of pleasures, like I said, and then we usually put our efforts in that instead of seeking out productive ways of doing things, healthier activities. And we should know that a lot of the times we should be aware of what we're doing, because uh, we tend to forget, and then we overdo things. We are on social media for so long that we forget that it's not good, right? So we should have a cut-off time, and then at times we should detox out of this, like abstain for a while before going back into social media. I'm going to try and make another video talking specifically on this part of dopamine, where how you can actually try and detach yourself from these things, right? And so there you have it. Hope that was well understood, and that's the end of my presentation. And thank you. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the whole presentation. It took me a while to compile a lot of these points, but I hope it was well understood. So now, to sum up things, um, make sure you're able to really control your dopamine, because it will trigger your addiction, right? So make sure you're not getting too much of it, because your addiction, you get addicted to this. So addiction is one of the most things that will affect you, that will affect your dopamine levels, and once you're addicted to it, then it will bring a whole lot of problems. And then avoid things that will trigger your dopamine levels, right? There are many ways of trying to avoid these things, right? For those, for example, those who are highly addicted to maybe things like porn and social media, things like porn, you can join communities like NoFap. NoFap is a sort of community, men's community, who totally trying to really get rid of the sensory, the pleasure of masturbation and porn all together, so that they can focus more on doing productive things, goals, on their goals and whatever they want to do, besides just trying to pleasure themselves and all that. And their communities like semen retention, all this can be, you can find these if you Google, or you just write on your YouTube. So you search on your YouTube for semen retention, NoFap, you're gonna find these communities, and then you can get pointers on how to go about this semen retention community. What they do, that they abstain from the pleasure of sex for a long duration, whatever duration you come up with, whether it's a year, 6 months, so that you focus on doing productive things. So you're not thinking, or you're not undergoing your pleasure. You're actually abstaining it, and you're abstaining from it rather, so that you can focus more on doing productive stuff. That's what semen retention is basically about. So once when you're actually abstaining from it, you are also learning how to control your sexual urges. You're learning how to control your sexual your energy, basically, and you're focusing your energy away from thinking about these pleasures that come with sex and all that, and focusing it on much more productive things, like being creative, starting new things, like whatever you're going to start on your job, your work, side hustles and stuff like that. So basically that's what these communities are all about, instead of just sitting around and then always feeding your pleasure systems with all those dopamine, and you have to also learn that what really triggers your dopamine. As for social media, for those who are addicted to social media, the only thing you can do, basically, I'm sure there are plenty of other things you can do, but the best thing you can do for yourself is abstain. Go about it through sort of a fast. Make a fast, maybe a 30-day fast, however you feel that. If you're going to abstain for a period of time, at least you'll be able to control this social media. So you're staying away from social media now, and I must say that these things are not inherently bad. It's just that they just make us addicted to them. So you want to try and really disassociate yourself from a lot of these things, so that you do not get too addicted. So with the social media thing, you just have to abstain from it, fast from it of sort, create a sort of fast from it, so that whether it's a 30-day fast, 40 days, whatever, so that you rewire your dopamine levels to your natural levels again. Because if you're always on social media, always on the screen, scrolling, obviously you're going to rewire it, so that you're always seeking out ways to scroll, right? And that's how this how we get addicted to these things, you see. And like I said, guys, there's nothing inherently wrong with these things. However, all these things, social media, whatever you like, it's something that you like, it's part of you, but just too much of it will rewire your whole thinking, and you'll be having a whole lot of fog in your brain. So if you're able to maintain a healthy level of dopamine, right, you are able to discipline yourself enough so that you're able to detach yourself from the things that bring your dopamine up, then you're better suited to do the better and much more productive things with your life. Otherwise, if you're not able to do this, then you're highly unlikely to be able to accomplish your goals and do better things for your life. So anyway, this it's a wrap for that, and I hope this was understood. And it's been your boy Alfred, and peace.